Looks like it is 8 o'clock. I would like to say good morning to everyone. Welcome back to our virtual GIS day number 2. My name is Myra McShane, and I am honored to be serving as your room monitor for this session titled Bringing Indoor Maps to Public Safety. Our speaker this morning is Carrie Brennan. She is a GISP ENP and a product manager for public safety GIS content and mapping with GeoComm. Carrie has over 27 years of GIS experience as a consultant, trainer, and product manager, with a focus in providing solutions to local, state, and federal governments, especially in the areas of land records, utilities, and public safety. During this presentation, Carrie will highlight how indoor maps provide a new dimension of emergency response aimed at providing visual representation for indoor spaces to call takers. And it will also highlight a recent project aimed at bringing indoor maps to K-12 public schools throughout the Denko 911 district. As a reminder, this session is being recorded, and please use the chat to comment and ask questions. They will be addressed at the end of the presentation. And now I'll hand it off to Carrie.
Thank you, Myra. I appreciate that. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, you guys should be seeing everything. And appreciate you all being here today, bright and early on GIS Day. Or I guess we call it GIS Week now, don't we? And, you know, I was thinking about this morning, that it's pretty amazing that our chosen careers now have an entire week of celebration for the awesome things that we do. So what I want to talk to you about today is indoor maps in relationship to public safety. So as I jump into this, I do want to just give you a little bit of information about GeoComm. That's the company that I'm currently working with. We are the largest public safety GIS solutions provider in the United States. The solutions that we provide actually help protect over 100 million people across the United States, as well as military personnel on foreign bases. The company has been around for 26 years. We're actually based out of St. Cloud, Minnesota, although I am based in Indianapolis, and our sole focus is 911 GIS solutions. So we're not the typical GIS consultant who will also help you with parcel mapping or utilities. Our main focus is public safety. We are an Esri Platinum partner, an AWS Select Technology partner, and we have 17 statewide next-gen 911 GIS projects as well. The little map there just kind of gives you an idea of where we are and what we are doing. So just a couple of things about what we are not going to be talking about today. So we're not going to be talking about 3D maps, although I do talk a little bit about that at the end of the presentation. We're not going to be talking about indoor maps for every building in your state available to you right now. Part of the issue that we are trying to solve is the fact that today indoors is not I'll say a well-mapped space. The outside, we have great mapping data sets available to us. Indoors is lagging a little bit behind. So that's really what we're talking about. And I like to say that indoor maps is the next brave frontier for those of us in the geospatial world. So the other thing that I'm not going to be talking about is a solution for fully integrating with camera feeds, sensors, IoT data feeds. That is information that is coming, but it's not going to be the main focus of this topic. If anybody is interested in any of those, please feel free to reach out to me. I do have my contact information at the end of the presentation. So, why are we talking about indoor maps? Well, from a public safety standpoint, when we're talking about 911 receiving a call and those awesome frontline telecommunicators, There are challenges with locating 911 callers indoors. Just a couple of statistics for you. Basically today, over 80% of all 911 calls are originating from wireless devices, from cell phones. Those are statistics from NENA, the National Emergency Number Association. And, you know, naturally that's going to be higher in some areas, maybe a little bit lower in other areas. But in general, about 80% on average across the United States of cell phone or of 911 calls are coming from cell phones. Many of us have actually given up our home landlines to have our cell phones as our primary form of communication. This statistic, which actually came out pre-COVID-19, and it's from the National Human Activity Patterns Survey, stated that in the United States, the average citizen spends about 80% of their lives indoors. And when I first saw this statistic, I was a little shocked. I'm like, no way. But then I thought about it and I'm like, well, I work from home, especially since COVID-19, and work from home has become a bigger part of, I'll say, many of our lives. I leave home, I drive to the gym where I'm indoors. I leave home, I go to the grocery store, I'm indoors again. If you really start thinking about it, we do spend an awful lot of time indoors, and that's a staggering statistic. The issue with that is that locating 911 calls indoors is challenging. Now, we're not talking about if you're sitting in your living room and you have to call 911, but we're talking about locations that really would be large complexes. So being in Indiana, I'm going to reference the Convention Center in Indianapolis, Lucas Oil Stadium, the Notre Dame football stadium, Hinkle Fieldhouse, large places like that. As well, fatalities have occurred as a result of people not being able to be found indoors. So there is a story of a student who died from the flu. This was in early 2020, late 2019. Emergency responders could not find him, even though he had called 911. We've had a couple of discussions about this particular topic, and we're thinking perhaps he didn't have the flu, but he may have had COVID, and it was just undiagnosed, although that, of course, is purely speculation. The thing is, in the world today, help is here. So indoor positioning in the form of device-based hybrid location is being delivered now to 911 centers, to PSAPs, utilizing either the Google ELS or the Apple Hilo forms of device-based location information that's coming through the 911 data stream. That's really fantastic, because now we're no longer talking about a 911 call that might be, say, a phase 2 traditional wireless call where you're getting plus or minus maybe 100 meters. Now we're getting plus or minus a couple of meters, like plus or minus 10 feet location. As well, in particular in urban areas, there are improvements to GPS, GIS beacon services, and then indoor positioning systems are being deployed in a lot of different locations. An indoor positioning system is really very similar to a GPS, but it utilizes beacons within a building to allow you to track where you are. So if you think about it and you maybe download a shopping app, because of course, Black Friday is coming, and you want to be able to see the route to get from one store to another in a mall, very often those are going to be using indoor positioning systems. As well, NENA, the National Emergency Number Association, is working on a rewrite, actually, of their civic location data exchange format, which is just that. It is a data exchange format that enables you to map your GIS data so that it can be utilized in multiple different ways with multiple different systems. The great thing about the CLDXF exchange format is it has sub-address elements. So when we talk about an address, I live at 123 Main Street, there's a lot more associated with that address potentially. So we think about, let's say, Butler University's campus. What is every building's address on that campus? Where I went to university, we have one address. It's 925 Ramsey Lake Road. There are about 100 buildings on campus, but one 911 address. Where do we find ourselves in that situation? So we can actually map down to the building, the floor, unit, room, even get down to the seat level. So the challenges for locating 911 callers indoors is we're getting those great locations now coming in on our data streams with our 911 call, but an accurate indoor position without any indoor maps is really a little more than a blue dot on an otherwise blank whiteboard. And what I mean by that is this is a typical example of a 911 call coming in. The blue dot on the map is the location in which the call has been initiated. So the caller is somewhere south of West College Avenue and east of South Avenue F. That's not a lot of information for our first on scene responders to be able to utilize. I'm just going to play a really quick video to go along with this. When we add in an indoor map, now this is a 2D indoor map, we can now see that the caller isn't just calling from south of West College Street, but now the caller is in the northwest corner of Mason High School Auditorium. And there's a building entrance very close to the caller. That's that black arrow that you are seeing on the screen. Now, this just happens to be the way that we represent the data in one of our applications. This happens to be an application called GeoComm Maps. For those of you that are working in public safety today, we also have this integrated. Our GeoComm Maps application is integrated into the Rapid SOS portal. Rapid SOS utilizes the device-based hybrid location from Apple and from Google to be able to represent the 911 call very accurately. So on the screen in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see that there is a 2.5 meters. That is our uncertainty factor. So we're certain within 2.5 meters, or give or take 10 feet, of where the location of that call is coming from. And that is absolutely fantastic. If we were able to zoom in on this, we would see that the location of the call is actually coming from a store called Ragstock. We have additional mapping functionalities on here. The rooms are color coded based on their uses. So anything that you see in pink is going to be something that would be like a maintenance room. The blue areas happen to be restrooms. We also have stairs and elevators mapped out. And then also, this happens to be a mall that is a single-storied mall. But if you have a building that has multiple stories in it, then down in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see the blue box that has the 1 on it. That is our floor picker. For multiple floors, you can just click through the different floors and the display automatically changes. So how do we actually get this information into the system? Because today, less than 1% of buildings are in an indoor maps format and accessible for public safety. So one of the things that my company does is we work with you to convert PDFs or CAD drawings, JPEG images of good quality floor plans into actionable GIS data. And on GIS Day, that's an important thing to be really talking about, is the fact that this is actionable GIS data. So the screen that the images that you're looking at on the screen right now, the image on the left is what we would consider an effective floor plan resource. So this happens to be a school, and you'll see that it has architectural, like it's an architectural drawing of the school from when it was built. So there are proper door swings on it. All of the rooms are labeled appropriately. We have the ingress, egress. The other thing that we look for is to get additional content that is of value to public safety. So the locations of AEDs, fire extinguishers, storm shelters, all of the information that visually can be effective and helpful for a first responder. Now, the image on the right is what we would consider an ineffective floor plan resource. And the reason for that is you'll notice that the image is actually kind of skewed. If you look closely as well, there's a lot of what I consider noise on the image. So there have been notes written. This is probably a copy of a scan of a copy of a map. As well, even though we do have the rooms labeled with room B, C, D, we don't have good indicators of the doors. So we just have those big gaps. One of the things that GeoComm has done is we have made a significant investment in AI and machine learning to automatically do a lot of this data conversion. That's why we're looking for good quality sources. As well, when you are doing this data conversion, the information, when we geo-reference it to the Earth's surface, we may be able to get the 4 outside corners of the building aligned to what you see on aerial photography, but the internal building or the internal walls may not be as accurate as we want, especially for public safety. So this is another example of a flow chart or a diagram. And looking at it, you may be thinking, well, that looks like a pretty good resource. It is, but it isn't. And what I mean by that is if you look on the right-hand side of the screen, the woodworking and metals classrooms, as well as like the boys' locker and the girls' locker rooms, they're all kind of compressed. If we look over on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side of the screen, the parking lot is a little bit skewed. So it's not a perfect 90-degree line. So we would not consider this a good primary resource for doing data conversion. However, as a secondary resource, it has some great information, including the location of the fire alarms, extinguishers, and AEDs. And then, of course, ultimately, if we can get CAD files, we're able to filter down all of the data that we don't need or all of the layers that we don't need to just primarily convert into actionable GIS data. Again, these are some of the symbologies, the symbols that we map out. Smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, card readers. So if you're thinking in a secure building, you need to know where all of the card readers and access points are. Gas shutoffs, storm shelters. We try to keep this as consistent as possible. We have also mapped out some, I'll say some interesting buildings that you may not think of, but we've done a number of airports where one of the symbols is the baggage claim. I did not realize that that was a standardized symbol, but it is. We utilize the NAPSIG standardized symbology set for all of these as well, so they're industry standard. Now, one of the important things about GIS data, as you all are very aware of, is data maintenance. And one of the things that we have put in place is a data integrity process. So the way that what we are doing works is we help you with the data conversion. In order to make this data accessible through Rapid SOS, we actually store it and host it in our own content library, but we can also deliver the data back to you in multiple different formats, mobile map packages, file geodatabases. If you're going to be moving into the Esri ArcGIS Indoors format, deliver it back in that format as well. But ensuring that the data is current and relevant, what we do is we look at your data basically on a 12-month period. And at the 9-month mark, if we see that your data has not been updated, we send a notification to the primary maintenance contact. The primary maintenance contact then can either log into our online data maintenance portal, make any changes that they are aware of, or they can communicate back to us and say, nope, there haven't been any changes in the last year. If we get no communication back, we don't update the expiration date essentially. And after 5 years, then we mark that data as expired. It's still included in the content library, but what that does is that enables a first responder, a telecommunicator, when they're sending police, fire, EMS into a building to say, you know, I'm not certain that the hot topics at the mall is still the hot topics at the mall, because as we all know, in malls and areas, retail shops, stores tend to change with regular, on a regular basis. So, something that I did not add in onto this slide deck, and I do apologize, and I'm going to just kind of wing it, but is about the DENCO case study. I'm going to talk about that in a slide or two, but really what I want to do is talk about the data interoperability as well. So as I mentioned previously, indoors data, we utilize a schema based on the Civic Location Data Exchange format. What that does is it enables us to move data into the ArcGIS Indoors format or other formats for you, as well as keeping in mind that public safety focus. Again, we can deliver in multiple different formats. The key with what we are doing is we're not driving folks to our platform only, but rather empowering other platforms to utilize the GIS data that we have and will be creating. So if you're utilizing indoor map data in, let's say, a work order maintenance application that utilizes building footprints, or you're doing facility mapping, we can help you get the data converted. We love to have it available for public safety as well. An important thing about the data that we house in our content library is it is specifically for public safety, meaning that only public safety professionals, those in the PSAP, have access to it. So it's not something that you're necessarily going to see on, if you do a Google search or something like that. So something else that you may be aware of or may be interested in is Z-Access. So Z-Access is something that has really just started to come available in the public safety and 911 world. So the FCC mandated a number of years ago that cellular carriers would start providing not just an X and Y location from your mobile device, but also a Z access. As of June of this year, the 3 major mobile carriers have started providing Z access data into the PSAP where it is available. So When you look at your alley data stream that is coming in with your 911 call, and for those of you that don't know what an alley data stream is, it's your automatic location information. If you're calling from a landline, it's going to have your physical address, 123 Main Street, on it. If it is on a wireless device, it's going to be your X and Y, latitude and longitude coordinates, and then now also a Z axis. So this is really quite new that, you know, the data is starting to come into PSAPS. PSAPs are now wondering how they should be utilizing that GIS data. Well, again, we're looking at content without context in receiving this elevation information or this Z-axis information. So being able to relate that height of the call to an indoor map, are we calling from the second, third, or 100th floor of a building, is critical. A couple of notes about Z-axis as well, though, is that the Z-axis information that is coming in on the data stream is coming in a couple of different potential formats. Cellular providers could be using an elevation based off of barometric pressure. Most, though, are utilizing height above ellipsoid. Being the geospatial people that we are, we know that the ellipsoid is not necessarily height above ground level. So what needs to happen is these indoor maps need to be developed out, and then also having on them what the height of each floor is. So the height, basically the height above ellipsoid of the first floor, second floor, third floor, and then as well, what is the height of the room? So if you're in a room that has a 10-foot ceiling versus a 30-foot ceiling, that can affect the calculations of taking that Z-axis and applying it to which floor you are associated with. So that's something that we are working on right now, is taking those elevations and applying them to indoor maps that we have converted. This is where I'll actually talk about Denton County, Texas. Denco 911 in 2019 decided that they needed to provide more information to their telecommunicators because they were getting a lot of calls from inside schools in particular. So what Denco did is they provided, or they worked with GeoComm to actually start a process for doing data conversion. Now, understanding that there are, I looked today, in Hancock County, Indiana alone, there are over 250 buildings that are over 10,000 square feet. I got that information from Microsoft. A few years ago, Microsoft actually used AI and machine learning and mapped out every building footprint in the United States. And they came back with about 125 million buildings. And you think about that in terms of 911 calls, that's a lot of location that we need to be able to find. Anyways, Hancock County had about 250 buildings. So think about that. Those are going to be high schools, some of the big industrial buildings, you know, and this was before a lot of the new construction that has been happening. So going back to Denco, what Denco did is they decided that they weren't going to get every single building in their system in a single shot. So what they did is they decided to work in phases, prioritize the different types of buildings that are critical for them. And they decided that schools were going to be the most important for phase one, because when something goes wrong at a school, it's very important to understand where let's say where an active shooter is inside a building, or where children might be sheltered in place. So they worked with the community and with the school boards to source floor plans. We've been working with them to convert the data. At the moment, they have over 86 primary and secondary public schools converted. Their next phases include looking at major campuses. They've got a University of Texas campus that they want to get in there, as well as any private schools they're going to be working on converting. The other thing that we're working on with them is to answer some of this Z-axis questions that are coming up. So they're utilizing some GPS technology to go out and gather the height above ellipsoid of the buildings that they are mapping out, and then that's being able to be translated into floor awareness as well. So I have talked for a good bit of time, and I'm going to, because I'm on a single screen, I'm going to actually exit out of sharing my screen so that I can see if there are any questions, if that is all right. As soon as my mouse works. Oh, Leanne, thank you for sharing the NAPSG symbol library. It's actually a really fantastic symbol library. Graham, you asked, basically, although Z-axis is, as it relates to wireless calls, is not perfect, it's still going to give more information than is currently available. Do you foresee that there will be sufficient inertia amongst public safety communities to ensure that more accurate data becomes readily available? So my answer to that is yes. I do believe that we will get inertia moving forward. Depending on what you are looking at, and I'm going to kind of put on a sales hat a little bit here and say, one of the things that my company has done is really looked at ensuring that indoor maps can be created and converted and made available to public safety and GIS professionals in a at a cost that is what I would consider highly appealing. So if you want to talk about prices and things like that, you can contact me offline, again, because I don't want to make this all salesy, but essentially, if you are a rural, a rural county, 5 or 6 schools, you have the potential to convert all of your data into actionable GIS data for the cost of what it might cost you to replace one radio in public safety. For those of you that are strictly GIS, we're talking, a couple of $1,000 is what it would potentially cost, depending on the size of it as well. So I think the more that indoor data is made available, then I think the more that public safety will want to get on the bandwagon and get it included in their mapping systems. Now, like any enterprise GIS, we also need to make sure that this information can be used across the enterprise. So if you're mapping a courthouse, you want it available to facilities management potentially as well. And yeah, as we move forward, I think we're just going to see more and more of that. The indoor space is, again, as I mentioned earlier, it is the next frontier for mapping. One of the things that COVID certainly has I'll say, helped with this process is a lot of people now are looking at different ways to do facilities management, site management, as well as just looking at space allocation and resourcing. So it's important to have that information well mapped. That's just one of the things that needs to happen. Now, some people may actually say that, I've had, floor plans in my computer-aided dispatch for a very long time. And that may very well be true. But you may not have them in something beyond just being a scan of a CAD drawing. And as I mentioned previously, if you go to the mall, stores change in the mall very, very rapidly. The other thing is, if we're talking about something like a school, not only can we have things like the room names mapped out, but we can also have the location information that is important for first responders. So if a 911 call happens from a school, let's say that it is a child that calls 911 because there is an incident occurring, they may not know that they're in room 208, but they may know that they're in Mrs. Jones's room. Well, Mrs. Jones is in room 208 this year, but next year she might be in room 127. So contextually being able to continuously update that information. As well, there are areas, especially in schools, and I'm thinking high schools in particular, that are might have names that are commonplace names that wouldn't necessarily be on the map. I'm in the seniors corridor, where all of the senior lockers are. Well, that's not necessarily something that a first responder or a telecommunicator is going to have in front of them. That's why we want to have current and up-to-date, relevant and actionable GIS data in the form of indoor maps. I don't see any other questions at the moment. Is there anything else? I'm going to just reshare my screen one more time because this does have my contact information on it. So if anybody would like to dive deeper into this, I would be very happy to further the conversation. I'm a huge fan of, and I mentioned this earlier to a coworker, that I really think that the indoor mapping for me, especially from a public safety standpoint, I have really found my passion project. I'm very passionate about it. I'm very excited about where we are going as an industry when it comes to mapping indoor spaces, and taking that Z-axis information, as well as starting to talk about 3D, is exciting. It is kind of a brave new frontier. I know we're just about out of time, but just one final note that I just want to say to you about this is indoor maps. People might be thinking, oh, that's a huge undertaking, that's a huge project, and I don't think that I necessarily want to tackle that right now. What we're talking about is really just additional data layers in your enterprise GIS. So we're talking about buildings, yes, they're still just points, lines, and polygons. And, this is no different than if you are, say, mapping out a new subdivision for utilities or road center lines and address points. It's also, a bit of an elephant in the room. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Prioritize the different types of buildings that you want to get in. Our research has said that most public safety want to have schools in first, then government facilities, then move on to large event spaces and the locations where a lot of 911 calls might happen. So I like to use the example of Nashville, Tennessee. There are a number of high-rise buildings very close to the downtown Lower Broad area that have 20% occupancy. People have bought these buildings and converted them into Airbnbs. So you think about it, you go to Nashville, you have a good time. Let's say you trip and fall, you need to call 911. Do you know where exactly you are in that building? Maybe not, especially if you are not directly from that area. So with that, I think.
Carrie?
Yes.
I do have, I see. Hold on, there's a feedback here. Let's see. Oh, well, I apologize for the feedback. I'm not quite sure what's going on. So Megan Compton has posed a question for you. Do you see an impact on PSAPs for agencies with the storage this detailed for this type of detailed data? Any processing challenges for workstations and CAD programs?
That's a really great question, Megan. So the solution that we are providing today utilizes cloud-based hosting. So we have a cloud-based solution. Other vendors may actually provide a file to you. The other thing that we can provide is a mobile map package, which is a very lightweight and easily accessible format to see the indoor maps space. And the nice thing about using something like a mobile map package is it can be loaded both onto a desktop for use in mapping applications, but it can also be loaded into mobile data terminals to bring this data into the field with the first responders. From a CAD perspective, I did mention that we do have our own set of products that we utilize, but we are trying to work with a number of different CAD vendors to ensure that indoor maps are going to be available in their applications as well. The way that I see it is most of this is probably going to be cloud-based and delivered through feature services.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I definitely want to thank Carrie for this very great presentation and all the information regarding indoor maps and taking our public safety and emergency response to the next level. Thank you so much, Carrie.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy your day.